Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Aufhebonus Bonus, our regular episode in which we deal with your questions and comments. This is Bunga Cats, the global politics podcast at the end of history. And here, on fait le bunga bunga, n'est-ce pas? George?
Yeah, the new theme tune, it's got everybody talking. I like the old one as well. But I think you're the most Eurotrash amongst us, Alex, so it probably resonates with you the most.
Probably.
They're an American band, but it is a great thumping track.
A fake French band. But anyway,
I think the term is faux French, Alex, actually.
Yeah. No, I don't want to give them the credit of even using a French word to describe their fakeness. But anyway, no, great song. And we're happy to have it. And I think it works. I guess we should set an objective that we discuss every single place in the world mentioned in that song. That should be our goal.
Yeah, some of them will be tricky, but we can do our best.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of objective setting. It sounds like we then have to self-evaluate how we've progressed against our objectives in this calendar year or whatever. I just don't like the sound of that. You've
been like bureaucracy poisoned, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, for a long time.
Okay. So we are going to discuss your questions, and we're going to start back to front from the last Aufhebonus bonus, which was in November, relatively recent, episode 302. So firstly, Elias Braun makes some comments with regard to leaving the EU and other aspects of European politics, Ukraine and Germany and so on. So let me just go through this. Addressed to Phil, I think where we differ is that I don't really believe in the political feasibility of what you propose. That is to say, Italy leaving the EU. You're right that my argument does imply that an Italian exit would destroy the EU's foundations and create a real political opportunity. But I don't believe that a successful political movement advocating that is possible in Italy, and much less so in France or Germany. That is why the left is failing or disappearing everywhere in the EU. You can't be radical without being against it, but you can't win if you are. And much as I would like to imagine there's a boulevard open for popular anti-EU movement, as you were saying last episode, I don't see it, although I admit to not having any better solutions. Similarly, I don't think it's possible for the Ukrainian leadership, even if they wanted to pursue the strategy you propose, and Phil will have to clarify what that strategy was.
Yeah, so my suggestion was as part of Ukraine kind of carving out greater political independence as part of the condition of its war, it would be better to pivot towards guerrilla warfare in the occupied eastern territories rather than the full frontal assaults, which are much better for and lead to, better for NATO planners and also lead to dependence on NATO countries.
Right. So continuing Elias's comment, they wouldn't be able to pursue the strategy that Phil proposes, given it would imply much greater loss of territory and a Russian occupation with no end in sight. As a smaller nation at war, you'll always take the weapons, even if you lose some independence, since the only other option appears to be losing all of it. I do agree on what you said about its failures between 2014 and 2022, though. And then finally on German monarchism, which we made reference to the fact that support for a return of the German monarchy has risen in Germany, is definitely an expression of repressed nationalism, says Elias. But then again, support for restoration has been fluctuating between 10 to 20% for decades in France, and nothing's ever come of it. Well, Phil, so this was addressed at you, so why don't you respond firstly on Italy exit?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Elias kind of articulates the problem, right, but also makes it entirely self-fulfilling. As long as it seems an impossible task, it will be an impossible task. And I think the fact remains that the European Union is more fragile than it appears. The cost of leaving it, especially for those states in the Eurozone, are significant. I mean, the process of Britain withdrawing from the EU was difficult and is still difficult today, and that's without withdrawing from the Eurozone. That's just the EU. But nonetheless, I think there is no way except except restoring national popular sovereignty in the member states of the EU, if there is to be any possibility for the revival of meaningful democratic mass politics in Europe. There's no way around that. On the question of Ukraine, I'd say I'd still stick by what I said, that as far as there is no end in sight to the Russian occupation at the moment, right? I think the only way the Russian occupation will end is if there is there's a change of government, a change of regime in Russia. And that is something which is a much more difficult proposition for Western states, I think, than perhaps for Ukraine. So it doesn't seem to me that that there is a prospect of Ukraine recuperating all that territories. So that leaves the question still open as to what the most appropriate strategy is to maintain Ukraine's independence. And it seems to me that in terms of maintaining long-term costs for Russian occupation, a guerrilla war in the east, through which also Ukraine makes a political kind of pitch to Russian-speaking minorities, Russophone minorities in eastern Ukraine, seems to me a much better strategy. But I don't want to get too hung up on questions of what is most kind of militarily appropriate for Ukraine, given I'm not Ukrainian, I'm not in Ukraine, but rather to focus on what seems to me to be entailed by a logic of political independence.
So let me just jump in, because I'm to kind of put the question to you, because I don't really have an answer. But doesn't all this imply then that if the Ukrainian leadership is wedded to NATO and it's going to want the arms shipments and it's going to want to be enmeshed in that whole approach, why do we care about Ukrainian independence? Why is that of interest to us? Why politically would we support that and not, for example, dedicate efforts instead, the political line then being opposition to further NATO involvement, and kind of forget Ukraine?
You could go that line, but that would be to dictate, to suggest what NATO should do would be to accept NATO, as a legitimate actor.
Hey there, you've reached the end of a short excerpt from an episode that's been released only to our patrons. If you'd like to join us and gain access to around 2 Patreon exclusive episodes a month, please go to patreon.com/bungacast. We'd love to have you.